Story 1. I fell 5 stories, approximately 55 feet. I was pushed off a balcony. Thankfully, I landed on a patch of grass about 6 by 6 feet, surrounded by cement planters and a gridiron fence. It was a fortunate spot to hit from that angle. I broke more than 25% of the bones in my body, was fully paralyzed from the waist down, had a broken rib that punctured my lung, and one compound fracture almost led to severe blood loss. I also cracked my head open on the balcony during the fall and again on my knee upon impact. I was in the hospital for a year. The paramedics who initially brought me to the hospital would visit occasionally because they needed to see a success story. The spinal surgeon and neurologist told my dad he was excited because he rarely has the opportunity to work on cases like mine, as falls and injuries of that nature usually result in death. I have made a full recovery since then. Story 2. I almost stepped in front of a semi-trailer truck that was traveling at 110 kilometers per hour through a red light. The only reason I didn't step out onto the road sooner was because my lighter was malfunctioning and wouldn't ignite my cigarette, so I stopped to shield it. I could say that smoking saved my life that day, but on the other hand, I might have been more aware of the traffic if I wasn't trying to light my cigarette. Story 3. I was stabbed in the chest when I intervened as 2 men were assaulting a woman. The knife lodged in my rib cage, and if it had been a few millimeters to the left, it would have hit my heart. It was a narrow escape. Story 4. I was crushed underneath a truck after the jack stand slipped. The truck hit me while I was on my side, breaking almost all my ribs and damaging my sternum. I suffered a collapsed lung and accepted death that day. Once I relaxed and realized I was going to die, I started hearing my ribs pop until the truck rotor hit the ground and stopped. I was then able to wiggle myself free. My only thoughts were that I couldn't believe my wife and kids were going to find me like this. I even tried writing "I love you" in the cement. Story 5. Almost drowned and was ready to die, but my whole family was on the shore. I didn't want them to witness my death, so I found the strength to get out. I couldn't even stand up, coughing up water. Reevaluate your swimming skills before doing something foolish. Story 6. Twice, my heart stopped due to a drug overdose. The first time, I woke up to people going through my pockets and 2 men discussing which dumpster to put me in. The second time, my first wife performed CPR to revive me. I felt like I almost died. I was ice cold and had a slight blue color. I was unconscious for over a minute. You will be glad to know that I no longer use drugs like that. Story 7. 4 doses of jumper cables on the way to the hospital and in the emergency room. I can't even remember how many units of blood. 285 stitches, a fractured skull, 6 broken ribs, and a punctured lung. The truck hit me head-on while I was in my car. Story 8. Allegedly, when I had surgery, my surgeon found a tumor that was about 2 centimeters away from my brain. For those who care, I am 14 years clean with no recurrence. Story 9. I was bear sprayed and hogtied while someone under the influence threatened me with a gun, demanding something I did not possess. That was quite an experience. Story 10. I almost got hit by a car while crossing the street, with earbuds in and totally zoned out, when the car came out of nowhere. I jumped back just in time, but my heart was racing for an hour afterward. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 11. I had to be resuscitated by my son after a failed suicide attempt. Mental illness does not improve on its own. Story 12. 20 years ago, I was probably 2 minutes away from ending my life. I was sitting on the bed in a motel with my life collapsing around me. I had my sidearm next to me with 2 rounds in the magazine. Why 2? In case the first one misfired. That's how resigned I was to it. Story 13. Pretty close. I had a neighbor who was self-medicating and became convinced that the man living next to him, me, was Satan and that he needed to kill me before I broke into his house and killed him at night. He got a big gun and shot about 100 holes into the side of my house in an attempt to kill me. I hid in my bathtub for several hours while this individual turned my house into Swiss cheese, while the police waited for an opportunity to enter his house and apprehend him. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt, but he ruined my house. Story 14. Oh, I have a few experiences to share. 1. Once, I rode my bike through the gap between two trucks. A stone fell from a cliff just a few feet ahead of me. And the most dangerous of all. Once, I fell in love with a girl who was emotionally unavailable. I barely survived that. Story 15. I lost consciousness in the midst of free falling while skydiving. Thankfully, I managed to regain consciousness and activate the parachute before reaching the ground. I survived with a fractured ankle. Story 16. I have taken a toaster bath and have overdosed on cocaine multiple times. I have dated people who could potentially harm me. I have vertical scars on my arms. But the closest experience to danger? Slipping in the shower. I broke a tile with the palm of my hand. When I arrived at the hospital and the nurse cleaned my wound, I saw my own artery. Interestingly, it started pumping blood noticeably faster when I saw it. It was quite frightening. Story 17. I have lost consciousness twice. I have also been shot in the head with an air pistol, stabbed in the hand which I raised to block the knife, accidentally overdosed and had my stomach pumped, almost been crushed by a falling tree, fell backwards off a cliff but was caught and pulled up by my friend, was thrown off my bike and nearly run over by a truck, nearly hit by flying debris from a car crash and got trapped in a forest fire. My wife says it's a miracle I am still alive. Story 18. I almost drowned when I was little. Someone acted like they were going to run me over while I was walking and swerved at the last second. Story 19. I was home alone and started to choke on a vitamin. I couldn't breathe for about 2 minutes. It felt like my head was going to explode. So I rammed my whole body into the wall and coughed it up. Now I don't take any pills unless I'm near someone or on a video call. Story 20. When I was 6, I was in my dad's living room with all my Legos spread across the floor, building a spaceship. Once I was satisfied, I excitedly ran to the bathroom to show my dad, who was taking a shower at the moment. When he opened the door, we heard a loud crash from somewhere in the apartment. When we went out to look, we saw that the entire ceiling in the living room had collapsed, bringing down all the contents from the apartment upstairs, including the table, couch, and chairs. Dust and debris were everywhere, but my dad and I looked at each other as though I had just dodged death. If I had sat there just a few seconds longer, I would have been crushed. Story 21. 1/16 of an inch. That is how much the man who slit my throat missed my carotid artery, according to the surgeon who stitched me back up. Story 22. I was on deployment in Afghanistan on patrol. It was my first tour as a gunner. The Taliban ambushed us and fired rocket-propelled grenades at our mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle. All but one missed, which exploded right next to the gunner hatch. If it hadn't been for my Kevlar helmet and the turret, shrapnel would have likely taken my head. Story 23. When I was a child, I participated in some silly but fun games with 3 other kids, where we challenged each other in different ways. We were on a farm with a barn full of hay bales, and one of us came up with the idea to see how long someone could hold their breath while their head was buried under the hay, with the others sitting on top of them. The rule was that if someone tapped another's thigh, it meant they wanted to be let go. Everyone respected that until it was my turn. I remember them laughing as I started to panic and the light above me disappeared, until I somehow went into shock. I pushed all 3 of them off me, punched the first one in the face as hard as I could, and then ran away crying. That is a memory for life. Story 24. I fell off a cliff and sustained a semi-fracture in my neck. That was a close call. I was washed away in the Pacific Ocean. If my friend hadn't noticed, I would have been in big trouble, as I didn't have the strength to swim back on my own. Story 25. I took Xanax while drinking once and ended up sleeping for 36 hours straight. I didn't think much of it until my friend told me that I could have easily overdosed. Story 26. A friend shot me with an air rifle 2 months ago. The pellet was 1 millimeter from my aorta and remains there. Story 27. I tried to hang myself from a pine tree. I planned it for weeks and marked the branches where I needed to stand and where my head needed to be with a permanent marker. I also measured the rope carefully. When I jumped, I hit the ground before the rope could extend. I miscalculated. I got serious rope burn on my neck and could barely swallow for weeks. I won't explain how I made my mistake, as I worry that people might use this information to harm themselves. I never achieved it successfully again because my first attempt was so terrifying that my survival instinct prevented me from trying again. Story 28. I nearly died at birth because I was a premature baby with low blood sugar. I spent 9 days in a clear incubator after I was born, and they kept me alive until I could sustain myself. Since then, I've been in some car accidents, but none have been as close to death as my birth. Story 29. A serial rapist was spotted prowling in my town in 1998. He attacked women in several states. For a couple of days, we were on lockdown at school with no recess. Our parents also wouldn't let us play outside. I remember my mom panicking because she heard noises outside, and I saw police officers with dogs searching through the creek. He was eventually captured after a short time and is serving a life sentence. Many years later, about 10 years ago, I read an article about him. It discussed his 1998 escape and how he made his way to my town, attempting to break into homes. It specifically mentioned a street close to mine and how he was looking in windows. As a 7-year-old boy, I was probably not his target, but I sometimes wonder if my mom did, in fact, hear him outside. Story 30. 1.5 years ago, we climbed Mount St. Helens in Washington. On the way down, I lost my footing and fell. The climb involved moving on and around boulders. I remember rolling for what seemed like forever and thinking, "Holy cow, I'm going to fall." Then, just like that, I stopped. Our friend, who was further down, instinctively threw out his arm and stopped my fall. I was fortunate not to have a serious injury. I have scars, but I lived. What really affects me is my husband telling me that as he watched me fall, he had never felt so helpless in his life. Story 31. Doctors refused to diagnose or treat my asthma before I turned 5 because they believed toddlers could not have asthma. Between the ages of 2 and 5, I was regularly hospitalized for asthma attacks and nearly died a few times. Interestingly, I am the reason my parents decided to get health insurance. Otherwise, I would have bankrupted them as a toddler. A few years ago, I was in a car accident that, according to the police, the body shop repair person, the insurance adjuster, and my doctor, I should not have survived. I walked away with only a bruised leg. Please remember to wear your seatbelt. Story 32. When I first moved to California, my family and I went to the beach. While in the water, I made the mistake of turning my back to a wave. I was toppled headfirst into the sand, and for a moment, I was stuck and panicking. I would call it a close call, but for that split second, I was very sure I was dead. Story 33. Pneumonia stopped my breathing, and I turned blue. I would have absolutely died if my son hadn't called the ambulance and performed rescue breathing until they arrived and assisted me in the emergency room. All the sounds went quiet. I've heard that's called auditory exclusion, and that soldiers under extreme stress in combat experience it as well. Story 34. I have had a few missed calls from a higher power. I nearly drowned when I was a toddler. I watched a tree get struck by lightning about 20 feet away. It destroyed every electronic device in our house, but I was fine. I was in a severe car accident when the driver of our car wrapped it around a tree on my 19th birthday. Story 35. I have had 3 very close encounters, all with cars. First, I was T-boned at a red light while traveling at around 50 miles per hour. I spun around 3 times and hit a police car. I was just seconds away from a potentially fatal accident, but I only ended up with a broken elbow. Second, a disgruntled customer waited for me to finish my shift at 11 p.m., turned off his headlights, and sped directly at me. I jumped backward just in time. Third, I was sitting against a concrete wall at work on my break when a random car decided to floor it and drive directly at me. They swerved only about 8 feet from me and were fully on the sidewalk except for one wheel. Story 36. Panic attack, 100 feet deep in the ocean. It reached a point where I could not breathe anymore, and my brain kicked in. If I didn't exhale, I would die with no one in sight. I exhaled and swam for the surface, remembering the 5-meter safety stop. I could see the surface, so there was no panic at that point. Story 37. At 35, I've experienced more than I would like to admit. There were nights of attempted suicide, actual attempts. There were nights when I thought driving a Mustang at over 80 miles an hour while drunk was acceptable in my early to mid-20s. During my deployments, there were times I felt I might not make it back home. There were moments when I wasn't paying attention and almost did something reckless, like accidentally letting my knee touch a heat sink with 227 volts alternating current. Other times, I slipped on a roof 40 feet up or used a chainsaw on a tree while on a broken ladder. I won't claim it's unfair that women generally live longer, but it's clear why this might be the case. Story 38. I thought my winter driving skills were impressive, but I nearly crashed into a gas station pump, which could have caused a massive explosion. Thankfully, I escaped without injury. Story 39. I had pneumonia a few years ago. It was scary. I remember the student nurse shouting at the doctors for not detecting it earlier because I was drowning from all the fluid in my lungs. Story 40. It was a while ago when I was just 13 years old. During winter, my friend and I were exploring an abandoned place that looked like a stadium. In the corner, there was a small fire that appeared to be a pile of trash burning. My friend suggested we go there and warm our hands a bit. We crouched near it, warming our hands for about 3 to 4 minutes, and suddenly something exploded in our faces like a flashbang. I literally couldn't see for a good 15 seconds. I still vividly remember it. It was a small gas cylinder underneath the pile of trash. I'm not sure if someone put it there on purpose, but my friend believes that might have been the case. They did a good job on the attempted murder, but we were lucky to only have burns on our faces and hands and a few scars to carry with us through life. Story 41. I almost drowned. I almost fell into a pit. I almost got hit by a car many times. I almost hung myself by accident. There may be more, but I can't remember. Story 42. I woke up driving straight towards an unguarded cliff into a fjord. This was some time ago, and I had no reasonable way to get an international cell plan. The other 2 people interested backed out, so I went alone because there was no way I was canceling a trip to Iceland. In the northern part of the Westfords, I had no way to contact anyone, just a paper map and a pre-planned route I checked the morning before leaving. I was running late for my hotel and couldn't call to let them know or change the reservation. Then that happened. I drove slowly and attentively to the next town, took a nap, chugged caffeine, and arrived at the hostel before they called the police about a missing tourist. They were concerned but just glad I showed up. Story 43. It depends. My life was threatened by a knife to my throat by the boyfriend of someone I used to know. He apparently suffered a cerebral hemorrhage as a toddler and was just seconds to minutes away from various attempts on his life. He also had an injured lung. I casually spent a weekend with someone who later turned out to be a murderer. I am unsure which incident is closest in severity, though I think it might be one of the attempts or the knife at my throat. Story 44. My appendix ruptured, but my liver and intestines adhered to it, preventing anything from spilling out and causing peritonitis. They sent me home from the emergency room, and I spent the entire day turning in pain on my bed. The next day, I had an ultrasound and was sent to another emergency room for surgery. 2 weeks later, I developed an infection, and they had to place a drainage tube. This was done while I was awake with local anesthesia, which did not work when they punctured my intestines with a large needle. Story 45. I have almost drowned 4 times. Interestingly, I was saved by the same lady 3 of those times. Once in a spring, once in a pool, and twice in the ocean. She saved me once, and the second time I made it out by pure luck while she was also there. Story 46. Choking on melted cheese from a McDonald's poutine. I recall tapping my mom to alert her because I couldn't talk. She just looked at me and continued eating. As I was panicking, my little brother's drink was right there, and I debated whether to drink some because I knew he would be mad at me. Should I upset my brother or continue choking? It shouldn't have taken me long to decide, but I drank some anyway. Additionally, I was experiencing alcohol withdrawal. Story 47. I was revived after an electrical shock. A female coworker kept that possibility alive by administering cardiopulmonary resuscitation until the ambulance arrived. Story 48. I genuinely don't understand gastroesophageal reflux disease, but was diagnosed with it after COVID-19 and because my bed is broken. I've woken up choking a few times and felt like I was going to die, but I might just be overreacting. Story 49. I suffered heavy bleeding after my cesarean section. Fortunately, I was already in the operating room. I just remember feeling very warm and sleepy. Story 50. Close enough to feel the pressure of AK-47 rounds passing my head. A sound and feeling I will never forget. Story 51. About a month or two ago, I almost threw myself in front of a car. I don't know if that counts, but yes, that happened. Story 52. Personally, I believe I was dead for a little while. I overdosed and tried to hang myself. When I came back, everything felt wrong, like I didn't belong here. I have felt this way for over 23 years. Story 53. This moment right now. Now this one. Now this one. Now this one. Now this one. Story 54. On Good Friday, I was in a boating accident and became trapped beneath my capsized boat in complete darkness. I held my breath for about 2 minutes and thought to myself that this was it. I prepared to inhale water to end my struggle, but by sheer chance, I discovered a tiny air pocket. After about 15 minutes of figuring out how to free myself, I was eventually rescued. Story 55. Sepsis after a tooth abscess. If I hadn't gone to the hospital, I would have been dead in 24 hours. Take care of your teeth, everyone. Story 56. I woke up to my leg jerking uncontrollably, and then my whole body began experiencing spasms. This lasted for about 20 minutes before my wife called an ambulance, and I blacked out. When I regained consciousness in the hospital, they had me drink a colon cleanser. It worked quickly. According to the doctors, my toxicity levels were so high that I nearly died. Now I drink one of those cleansers about once every 6 months. I had assumed that since I eat fairly healthy and do not drink or smoke, my colon would naturally clean itself like a perfectly healthy person's would. However, I have learned from multiple doctors that many people mistakenly believe they are healthy but actually have various conditions in the categories of autoimmune disorders or mild colitis, Crohn's disease, or other colon disorders that may even be in remission. In these cases, the body can fail to absorb the full range of nutrients from foods, allowing harmful bacteria to grow despite consuming recommended amounts of fiber. Story 57. When I had the norovirus and was alone at home, my roommate and his girlfriend made dinner, and we had a pleasant evening. My roommate went to his girlfriend's place to sleep. Suddenly, around 1 a.m., I woke up shaking and feeling saliva building up in my mouth. I ran to the toilet, threw up, and then, when I thought it couldn't get worse, I had to use the toilet for the other end as well. Felt like a water jet. There I was sitting on the toilet, exhausted and sweating, feeling terrible, but I thought it was over. It wasn't. I suddenly felt nauseous and passed out. The doctors explained that this often happens due to a significant shift of fluids in the body. On the way down, I hit my head, maybe on a small ledge of the shower, and I don't know how long I lay on the bathroom floor with my head bleeding. When I came to, my only wish was to make it to my bed, but I had no strength to call for anyone. I passed out again in bed within a few minutes. Sometime in the morning, my roommate's girlfriend arrived, and when she saw the bathroom, she rushed into my room and woke me up. We called an ambulance, and the doctor said I was very lucky. Even healthy people can die from dehydration, and in my case, also the loss of blood. Man, I seriously thought that when I closed my eyes in bed. This was it. It was terrifying. Story 58. Cancer caused a broken femur. The doctor performing the hip surgery only completed part of the procedure and stitched me back together because he thought I was going to die on the operating table. They do not appreciate it when a patient dies during surgery, as it creates additional paperwork for them. Story 59. I choked on food and had to have the Heimlich maneuver performed on me, which was painful. I also experienced severe preeclampsia with hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes, and low platelet count syndrome. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and I developed edema and pneumonia. Story 60. I can't swim. I never learned how. I can keep myself afloat and paddle like a dog, but moving in a body of water is difficult. One summer, I went to a lake with some friends. We all eventually went in, and they made their way to a little floating island in the middle of the lake. I was hesitant at first, but decided to paddle my way over there as well. Halfway there, my legs started to get tired, but I tried to push through anyway. Big mistake. They suddenly felt like heavy boulders dragging me down, and I couldn't move them at all anymore. Panic set in, and I had trouble keeping my head above water. I could barely get air in, so I couldn't even scream for help. The slight current of the lake and the adrenaline in my system eventually brought me back to the shore. After this experience, I've never ignored my body when it tells me to stop. I also now understand why a drowning person is silent. Story 61. I was homeschooled and worked full-time for my dad once I turned 14. We repaired private water systems, which usually involved pulling pumps out of wells with our pump truck. Most pumps in our area were submersible and located 200 to 500 feet down a well. Most of the time, it was just my 18-year-old brother and me on the job. The boom on the truck would pull 20 feet of pipe and wire at a time. My job was to coil the wire and guide the pipe once we disconnected it. One day, we found ourselves in a tight spot where I didn't have a good place to put the wire, and I was basically coiling it underneath where I was standing. My brother hadn't reconnected the winch cable to the pipe going into the well and slammed his wrench down on the pipe jack that was keeping the pipe from sliding back down. Without it being connected to the winch on the truck, the pump and 2 feet of piping shot down the well. The problem was the wire I was coiling underneath my feet was connected to that dropping pump. The only thing that saved my legs or my life that day was that I was able to brace my arms against the side of the pump truck and the side of the pump house. It wrapped and pulled a couple of times, but never tight enough that I couldn't get free. This was the 1990s. Working on this type of job at our age barely raised an eyebrow. Story 62. 3 times I was extremely close to death. My mom was pregnant with twins. A physical accident during her pregnancy resulted in the loss of my twin brother. I was fortunate to survive. When I was a toddler, I drank drain cleaner because my father mistakenly put it in a Gatorade bottle under the sink. The third incident occurred a couple of years ago. I looked left before crossing the street, then looked right and started to cross. Little did I know that during the time it took me to move my head from left to right, a modified sports car, which was completely silent, came speeding around the corner. The driver had to swerve into the other lane to avoid hitting me. Story 63. Throughout my life, I have faced many close calls. I'm surprised I'm still here, to be honest. Risky driving, suicide attempts, drugs, and alcohol have taken a toll. I'm tired of it all and just want to have a peaceful life. Story 64. My first memory is of touching the metal tines on an electrical plug while trying to plug in a plastic Christmas tree when I was 2. I wanted to hear the music. I remember waking up in the ambulance. A horse stomped on my back when I was 4. I didn't break any bones because, according to the doctor, I was too flexible. I still have a rib that does not like to sit tight, though. I popped a lung when I was around 8, blowing up a balloon. I got really tired and fell asleep before I knew anything had gone wrong. I woke up with the side of my face swollen and making a crackling sound when touched. My mom rushed me to the emergency room. The doctor said the hole had sealed itself back up and that I should be okay as long as I take it easy. They also mentioned they had never encountered that situation before, but I am unclear exactly which aspect prompted the comment. There were a lot of signs that got ignored. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 34. Plenty of other things happened over the years, but those were some of the significant ones. Story 65. There are a few instances that would have and should have killed any normal person, but because I am so silly, I have built a tolerance to them. One notable incident was crashing into a lamppost headfirst while going 30 miles per hour on my bike without a helmet. Story 66. Inches. The motorcycle wreck really messed me up pretty bad. If I had hit the car slightly to the right, I would have been flattened. I was going about 45 miles per hour when a guy pulled in front of me, so from 45 to 0 in an instant. I can only imagine that your organs would just explode. Story 67. I have been in a car accident where we flipped over several times and landed upside down. I have been in a house fire. I have experienced alcohol poisoning. I have had a gun pulled on me, and almost 2 years ago, I used cocaine excessively one night to the point where I thought I was going to die. Story 68. We are always 1 second away from death. Live as if death is peeking over your left shoulder. Story 69. I technically died twice and was resuscitated. The first time was in a car accident, and the second time was when my lungs collapsed in the hospital during my recovery. Story 70. Probably less than 12 inches. I was walking and talking with a friend when I glanced down the road to cross. I didn't see a semi-truck, but my buddy pulled me back. I almost walked in front of an 18-wheeler moving at least 45 miles per hour around what I would consider a blind corner. Story 71. I blacked out while driving due to a medical emergency. When I regained consciousness, I was overlooking a large canyon. I had gone off the side of the road and crashed into a rock right at the edge of the cliff. It was the only large rock in the area that could have stopped me from going over the edge. Story 72. I had a massive stroke, heart surgery, and learned to walk again all in the same year. It was the hardest year of my life. The nurse at the first hospital I was taken to told my wife, "Get him out of here. He's dying." Story 73. Overdose on heroin and fentanyl. Alcohol withdrawals, including seizures and delirium tremens, but I cannot specify how close that was. I was in a car accident as a child, saved by the only tree on the side of a mountain. Otherwise, we would have fallen off a short cliff and rolled down a steep hill. I was transported by helicopter after that crash. There was a small rock slide with several rocks 2 to 3 times the size of a human head, and smaller rocks bouncing and flying near my friend and me while we were hiking. We were not injured, but some rocks came within inches of us and could have easily caused fatal injuries. My appendix ruptured. I experienced several fortunate near misses. I was threatened at gunpoint by someone who could have accidentally or intentionally shot me in the head over nothing. Story 74. Close on 3 occasions. A mortar in Vietnam almost landed in my lap. I was almost in a deadly car wreck, and I almost bled to death on another occasion. Thank God I'm still here. Story 75. I choked on a coffee candy when I was young. I lay down on the grass, accepting my fate because nobody was around. I survived somehow. Story 76. Pretty close. The first time I saw the bright light and the tunnel. The second time, the hammer came down on what I assume was a dud round since there was a round in the chamber, but no significant explosion. The third time, I stopped breathing long enough to stop caring that I wasn't breathing, and after the initial discomfort faded away, it was the best feeling I have ever had in my life. I remember thinking, wow, this makes it all worth it. Story 77. Multiple nights in my life, my asthma and acid reflux activated simultaneously, choking me for hours. All I could do was sit up, clutch my chest, and force myself to gasp for air every 30 to 60 seconds to avoid suffocation. It took years of unhelpful doctors before I was properly diagnosed, and now I take medication. I will never take breathing for granted. Story 78. When I was 9, I tripped and fell halfway through a window, with my legs inside and my torso, head, and arms outside. I ended up with stitches in both arms and one shoulder. If I had fallen all the way, I would have died. Story 79. When I was a child, I was walking home from school with my brother and mother. The sound of the traffic light crossing started, and I walked without looking. My mother pulled me back at the last moment as a car sped by. It turned out I was walking into oncoming traffic. A lesson learned that day. Story 80. A camel was chasing my cousin and me. There was a car accident in 2 seconds if my sister hadn't changed direction. Thank God. Story 81. My heart stopped multiple times during care for congenital heart disease, including open heart surgery. Story 82. I worked in construction and had just finished a long stint away from home. I was exhausted and closed my eyes while standing for a moment. Suddenly, I felt the wind from an excavator arm swing past my head. I blinked and saw it pass by me. That was close. Story 83. Last fall was scary. At the time, I had a palpitating heart and I was unwell. I went to the bathroom, and when I finished, right as I turned around to wash my hands, for a brief moment, my mind and body felt as if they were simultaneously turned off. It was a strange experience, as I noticed it while remaining conscious, and thankfully, I was still standing so I didn't fall and potentially injure myself. This makes me wonder if people die in their sleep because their bodies shut down in a similar way. So, what causes it? Is it due to the conductivity or displacement of various metals inside our bodies? I don't know, but I'm glad I'm still here today because I have a dream to change people's lives around the world for the better, and I would be frustrated if I died before that happens. Story 84. It's hard to say exactly, but I guess it was as close as you can get to dying without actually doing so. There have been several times in my life when I felt it was the end. The one I will share happened on a Sunday morning after I had already put in 110 hours that week. I rolled a truck twice while I was about 20 miles outside of town on a not very busy road. On the second roll, I was thrown from the passenger window, my head was severely injured, and my back was broken in 2 places. I was out there, badly injured and unconscious. It wasn't until my boss glanced at the GPS map and noticed my truck wasn't moving and shouldn't have been stopped where it was that things changed. My company yard was in the next town, 45 miles away. When I didn't answer my phone, she checked the GPS and saw that my truck had dropped from 60 to 0 too quickly. She alerted emergency medical services, and her son headed out to find me. Remarkably, he beat emergency medical services to me. When he arrived, I wasn't breathing and he couldn't feel a pulse, so he began cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I don't know how long he performed CPR, but when he finally revived me, he was almost exhausted. I was disoriented and in tremendous pain once I woke up, and it seemed to take a long time for emergency medical services to reach me. If he hadn't come out and performed CPR, I don't think I would have survived until the ambulance arrived. It was truly the hand of God that anyone realized I needed help when they did. Story 85. I was out in the woods once exploring, and let me tell you, whatever's out there is either trying to kill you or harm you. As you can see, I'm still alive. Story 86. Within a few weeks of each order, I experienced a significant event. When I was 19, I was in a severe car accident. I broke my spine, was in a lot of pain, and could not care for myself. I attempted suicide, and a few days after being released from the psychiatric facility, I contracted severe pneumonia and ended up in the intensive care unit. The hospital bills were exorbitant. Story 87. When I was a little kid, my whole face swelled up so much that I was rushed to the doctor and told there was some bacteria in my eye. It was removed, but there was a high risk associated with the procedure at the time. Story 88. Throughout my life, I have choked on toast while driving, run a stop sign, nearly launched into a swamp, and collided with a moose while traveling at 100 kilometers per hour. Story 89. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I almost got shot by a pistol during a New Year's celebration. A man was firing at the floor, and I happened to run in the direction of the bullets when someone pulled me out of the way. Story 90. Rolled a car and suffered a severe concussion. I experienced another severe concussion and grabbed a live Jacob's ladder. I was hospitalized for a perforated lower intestine. I am 53 years old and have had about 1 concussion per decade. However, they are becoming more routine. I recently left the hospital for high blood pressure. Story 91. Aquaplaning in a turn, a semi-truck was coming towards me. I let go of the clutch, turned the steering wheel, and hoped for traction. Inches from certain death, I finally gained traction, and my car slammed into the side of the road. I had to stop and breathe for a while before continuing to drive. Story 92. Wrecked into a tree, the branch that came through the windshield missed my neck by about an inch and went through the back window. Story 93. Choked on steak, saved by the Heimlich maneuver. Slipped and almost fell 950 feet while rock climbing but managed to hang on. Fell asleep while driving on a highway. Woke up on the wrong side of the road with 2 wheels off the pavement, moving at 100 kilometers per hour. I hit the brakes, and the car spun out. Only very minor damage occurred, and fortunately, nobody was hurt. Story 94. I have a guardian angel. It's not my time yet. I have almost drowned twice, almost been electrocuted, and almost choked to death on food without anyone noticing. I have experienced 3 traffic accidents, excluding 2 serious near misses, one of which was quite serious. One of the near misses occurred while I was on my motorcycle going home during a breakup. I passed a busy and notoriously dangerous intersection without stopping because my mind was elsewhere. The week after, one of my schoolmates was involved in a traffic accident at that same intersection and never recovered. This made me appreciate that it definitely wasn't my time yet. Additionally, I discovered I am allergic to shellfish at the age of 16 after feeling unwell following some crab. My throat swelled up, but I didn't tell my mom and just went to bed. Thankfully, it cleared up during my sleep, but that situation could have gone very wrong. It's not my time yet, and I'm making the most of it. Story 95. I missed a dose one day and lost 10 pounds from vomiting. I also experienced brain zaps, which felt like my brain was being electrocuted, and I was extremely dizzy. I went to the hospital, where they gave me a gallon of intravenous electrolyte fluid and some anti-nausea medication. A close second was when I tried to make a 3-point turn on a dirt road and the rear tires went over the edge. My truck got stuck on the edge of the road, and it was at least a 20-foot drop with trees at the bottom. There was no cell phone reception. Story 96. I have been hit by cars 3 times. Once while walking with my mom and twice while riding my bike. In one incident, I was hospitalized with my right side crushed and experienced a long recovery time. Additionally, when I was in 1st grade, I was poisoned by the neighbor's child, who took her parents' pills and gave them to my sister and me, leading to a 2-week hospital stay for both of us. There have been a few other close calls, but those were the worst. Story 97. I had a perforated appendix and was rushed into surgery just 2 to 3 hours after arriving at the emergency room. The strange thing is I went to the hospital only because my general practitioner advised me to be safe. During a follow-up appointment, the surgeon informed me that it was the worst case he had ever encountered. Story 98. I had a burst appendix. We went to the hospital right before I wanted to go to bed. If we had waited 5 more hours, I would have died. If I had gone to sleep, I would have been dead. I was 10. Story 99. I saved my wife from choking on a piece of cabbage while on holiday the other year. I was hit by a car at the age of 8 and survived. At 9, someone tried to kidnap me. If it hadn't been for some scooters coming around the corner, I might not be here today. I have also survived multiple long weekends of drinking. Story 100. Well, my driving surely helped. But a loaded rifle pointed at my body from 2 meters away, by accident, could have gone worse. Story 101. I fell through the ice when I was a kid, although I have no memory of it. I flipped my first car less than 6 months after getting my license. If I had a passenger, their head would have been crushed. If I had been just a couple of feet to the right, my head would have been crushed as well. I couldn't find a bullet. I am not sure which situation was closer to danger, but those are the 3 that come to mind. Perhaps I faced a close call at another time and did not even realize it. Story 102. I veered off the path on an all-terrain vehicle in the Colorado mountains. Luckily, the detour led into a generous valley. I cannot stress enough that if I had lost control in any area other than the valley, I would have died there. Story 103. I was under a car that I had lifted on the side of the road. However, the jack I used wasn't rated for the weight of the car, and it collapsed with me underneath. It was a pretty close call. Story 104. I was snowed in during a blizzard on Interstate 80 in Wyoming in January several years ago. I would have truly died if the highway patrol had not found me 45 minutes after losing power in the car. Story 105. I cracked the back of my head on the sharp edge of a brick wall when I was a kid. I can still feel it sometimes if I lie at an odd angle. Story 106. I was crossing the road with my mother at the zebra crossing. The hospital was on that side of the road. I couldn't walk fast because I had a terrible wheeze when a tuk-tuk came quickly toward me. My mother pulled me back, and I was saved by just inches. Story 107. I fell into a manhole when I was a child. It was an area of the city that was still developing, and the local authorities' apathy was visible everywhere. I was walking with my cousins one evening, and it was a little dark with no streetlights. I tripped on a stone and fell headfirst into an open manhole. I made a clean dive, I didn't even touch any part of the manhole, not a single scratch. For the first few seconds, I didn't understand what had happened. I was surrounded by water gurgling around me, and when I surfaced for air, I found water pipes that I clung to while my cousins cried for help outside. A good Samaritan pulled me out. Otherwise, it could have been the end for me. Story 108. I was crossing the street on my way home from school when I was a sophomore. An irresponsible driver in a green sedan was speeding at 45 miles per hour in a school zone and drove past me, missing me by less than 5 feet. If I had started walking home from school just 1.5 seconds earlier, he would have hit me. Story 109. I was walking across the road and didn't pay attention. I walked into the side of a car going about 50 miles per hour, so I feel incredibly lucky. Story 110. I nearly drowned once. I had completely exhausted myself and was beginning to sink. At that moment, a hand grabbed me and pulled me out. Story 111. One day in 2022, I was riding my bicycle while listening to funk music. I felt excited and was riding fast, around 30 kilometers per hour, when suddenly, I was hit by a car driven by a woman who had just started learning to drive. Luckily, she hit the brakes quickly, so I only got hit on the leg and fell to the ground. Honestly, if she had kept going, I could have been dead or paralyzed. Story 112. I nearly drowned in a pool during swim practice in high school. Each pool length was 25 meters. We practiced breath-holding exercises, where 25 meters on one breath was standard. Occasionally, we would attempt 50 meters, but that was rare. I decided to try 75 meters and succeeded a couple of times. Eventually, I attempted 100 meters or 4 lengths of a standard pool on one breath. I reached about 85 to 90 meters before blacking out and going limp, face down in the pool. My friend rescued me and pulled me out of the water. The next thing I remember is my coach shaking me awake while I was lying on the side. I asked why they stopped me. I vividly recall how my body felt during that moment. Total calmness and peace. When I came to, I was euphoric and had an abundance of energy. Story 113. I came close to having a stroke due to a severe allergic reaction to a measles vaccine I received in high school. My blood pressure was extremely high, and the doctor informed me that if I had arrived a day later, I would have suffered a stroke. Story 114. Almost got hit by a train. I was about 12 years old when my family went to Alaska for the summer to visit my grandpa. I made a friend who wanted to show me this amazing spot where we could climb under the railroad tracks over the bridge and drop down to the middle of the river to play on the raised gravel area around the bridge footing. We hung out for a while, and when it was time to leave, I boosted my little brother up since he was too short to climb by himself, and I attempted to climb out last. I was about halfway up when I got stuck and couldn't pull myself up any farther. A train came around the corner, and I managed to drop down just in time. I seriously thought my friend and brother had been run over by the train, passed by, and they were there waiting for me, thinking I had gotten hit by it. I climbed out with some help, and we went on our way. Absolutely foolish, but I was a kid and definitely showing off for my little brother. Story 115. I was reckless as a teenager and young adult. I engaged in activities like speeding on the highway and being in danger spots late at night. I didn't realize it at the time, but I could have died in any of those moments. Now, as a new parent and a little older, I'm truly terrified of ignorance. Story 116. About half a second is all that stood between me and falling off the side of a mountain as I slid down a wet, grassy bank. Thankfully, I managed to dig in my fingers and heels and stop myself in time. The kicker? I was deliberately sliding down for fun. I dug in my fingers and heels because I couldn't be bothered climbing too far back up. I had no idea a cliff was there until my brother told me. His face was white as a sheet. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.